It seems to me that in Old Testament times, with the sacrificial system and the commandments and 639 add-ons to the commandments that were defined somewhat in the law of Moses, but also by the church leaders who wanted to be sure that every possibility was covered and that it was clear what the commandments meant. So we went from 10 to 639, it seems. But the emphasis seemed to be on these are rules and you got to keep them.
Right.
If you sin, you better go get a sheep, or if it's a big sin, you better go get a bull or a ram or a goat, depending on what the significant part of the offering was supposed to be. But it seemed to be focused on legal adherence, legal adherence. And then along comes Jesus, and it appears that the road to salvation, the road to relating to the law, seems to have changed. Am I off base or am I close?
No, you're absolutely correct. Now, I have a teaching on this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I go back to Abraham.
Yes.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob really were known as Hebrews. When babies were born in Egypt, they were called Hebrew babies.
Right.
And the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob taught their families how to revere God and how to hear God and how to follow his direction in their lives. Now, they were not perfect in the way that they walked and followed the direction, but they did seek his face to understand what his direction was. Abraham believed God and left Ur the Chaldeans, and he taught Isaac the same thing, to have that undying faith that you hear God and that they trusted him, and he taught Isaac to trust. Jacob, again, was not necessarily, always honest or had the integrity, but he still trusted God in his direction.
And I want to check to see if I'm headed down the right road with you, Paul. But you're using the example of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, who existed before the law was written down. And
exactly.
Maybe they were living more by grace at that time than the children of Israel did, starting in the Exodus from Egypt.
Exactly. You're catching that. That's exactly the way I believe it.
I introduced you before as my mentor and teacher. I am being mentored now, or demented, as the case may be. But so in the why was the law necessary? Why were the rules necessary?
Well, it's another simple explanation is that here you have Israelites, Hebrews, if you will, that were put into bondage and captivity. And as they were in that captivity, they were taught or told in that they had to when to get up, when to work, when to do this, how to do that. I mean, it was rules, 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 rules. And they knew nothing else but being in bondage and captivity. So along comes Moses, who happened to hear from God and had the freedom of knowing who God was and was listening to God. And he's told by God to go and free the people. Okay, so he goes to Egypt and sure enough has faith that God is going to set these people free, because he's only one man. He's not an army. He's only one person. And God, in his omnipotent power, brings about the freedom of all these Israelites. And even when they left and they walked through the sea was parted and they walked through that, they still had that unbelief. They still needed those rules, those guidelines. when Moses comes out into the desert, they're seeking him, saying, "Tell us what to do. Tell us what to do. Tell us what to do." And here comes Jethro, his father-in-law, and says, "Hey, you're gonna wear yourself out and all these people and everything else by doing this every day." And he gives him a plan to help them learn how to manage each other and lift each other up. So he breaks them into groups of 10, 50s, hundreds, and thousands, and says to Moses, take worthy people who understand and put them over these people. And they start making the decisions. He's training them how to be more independent and how to hear. And these leaders, then Moses, God says to Moses, bring these leaders, these elders that you've created up to me, and I'm going to put my spirit on them. And guess what they do? They say, oh, no, wait a minute, we're going to die. So they preferred to have the law because that's what they were used to. So the laws of Moses became the way to act and do and so on like that.
But along came Jesus. He didn't do away with the law, but he changed the way the law interacted with people.
Exactly. He changed the concept that they needed to hear from God, and not that they would circumvent the law, but that the law was good. But the freedom that we have is because we have that relationship
Right.
with God. And yes, no, we're not going to do it perfect. And yes, we're going to have that relationship. And so here we get the freedom of the spirit, but yet the people who the law is much easier to follow. That's the short and long of it. So when we hear about in Hebrews, or the book I'm talking about, that you're saved by, or Romans, that you're saved by grace through faith, and the teaching in New Testament is all about Abraham, the people who walked by faith, who lived by faith, and who listened to God.
Instead of the law being a list of rules that must be followed precisely,
Right.
it became code of conduct. It
Exactly.
became a descriptor of what Jesus would have our character become.
Yep.
And that's what it means by writing it in the heart.